What is a good bourbon to use to make an old fashioned for someone who is a complete novice to bourbon and whiskey? So I had to make this decision on a couple of occasions. And when I looked at my bar and what I had, I found myself coming back to two general categories of distilleries: Buffalo Trace and Maker's Mark, which just happen to be two of my favorite distilleries of all time. And I found that the reason I think is that I think just the general notes on these different expressions have some of the classic bourbon notes. There's nothing that's too extreme, nothing too wild. Kind of sticks in general to classic bourbon tasting notes, etc. And some of these other bottles, I just think were just a little bit out of that kind of sphere. So within that, I kind of feel, when you're picking for an old fashioned just versus just a regular pour for someone who's a novice, I think there's a little difference, because I think it's just a total novice to bourbon, you're giving them a pour. You could even try something in the 80s, 80 proof, 86 proof, or it could be, one of these 90, 94 proof. But I think there's more range. We can even go lower. In an old fashioned is a spirit forward cocktail. I think the bourbon and whiskey you use carries the drink. And I think you also don't want something getting diluted. So for that, I wasn't looking at proof below 90. So on two different occasions, I made a rye bourbon old fashioned and then a wheated bourbon old fashioned. For the rye bourbon old fashioned, just looking at what I had, so I didn't have your classic Buffalo Trace flagship. I did have a bottle of Eagle Red, but it was unopened and it's a special bottle. I just kind of want to do a review separately. So I figured I'd go to this. And this is the Buffalo Trace Kosher Rye recipe. Quite honestly, I used to actually probably like this a lot more. For me right now, I don't know. I just kind of find this, and this could change in a week. I might think otherwise, but right now I kind of think this is good, but just a little bit bland, not that exciting. Again, that can change all the time. But I thought 94 proof, this would be good. So I made it old fashioned, and I make an old fashioned, and I have one myself, and I thought it was good. I don't think it was anything crazy. And this was the first one out of the Buffalo Trace category. Next one was out of the Maker's Mark category, because I wanted to make a wheated bourbon old fashioned. So first thing I was thinking, which I didn't do, was I was going to say, okay, let's do the wheat recipe of this and see how they differ. But I kind of thought otherwise. The bottle I used, I finished with that pour, so I'll show you the equivalent. Maker's Mark Cask Strength. The one I used was the age stated one, 7 years, 2 months, but that's done now, so it's the same thing. I think that's a drop better. But in any event, I blew the doors off this old fashioned. I figured let's go a little more in proof, 112 proof. And normally I'd say that's too high for somebody new, but it's in the context of an old fashioned. You have the simple syrup in there and the bitters, and it kind of, I think it maybe kind of rounds it out a little bit. So personally, I think that was the better one. And in the Maker's Mark, family wheated bourbons, I don't think that was, even though it was a higher proof, I think it was good. So the point is that I found myself almost ignoring all these other bottles, because I just, I think they can all, in its own right, make a good old fashioned. But I think for someone starting out, I think you want to stick to, I think for an old fashioned, someone starting out, I think I wouldn't really go lower than 90 proof in any old fashioned. But then I kind of exceeded it. I kind of went to 112 on that one. I think you can get away with, I'm not going to put 130 in there, but I just kind of find that these classic, Makers, Buffalo Trace are kind of best. I also, in addition, feel old fashions in general. I've had in restaurants where Woodford Reserve works. Dare I say Bullet? Because Bullet and Woodford Reserve are two of them that I think work very good in cocktails. But I'm not talking about the regular Woodford, not the double oak. Work very good in cocktails, but not very good neat. And those would be other ones that would expand. But I just kind of, for some reason, still stuck to the straight and narrow. Something in the Buffalo Trace category, something in the Makers category. And those really worked for a novice old fashioned. And again, as far as just a regular pour, maybe you can go a little outside of that. But I feel a minimum 90 proof, go a little bit high, nothing crazy. Classic bourbon notes. And those work really well. And for some reason, I just kind of came right to those. Curious what you think is a good bourbon or whiskey to use for, or rye, could be rye too, to use for making an old fashioned for someone who's a total newbie, total novice to bourbon and whiskey, and how that may differ with something you would just give as far as just a regular pour. So that's my 2 cents on that. Hope you have a very happy Thanksgiving. Cheers.